Hi everyone and welcome to Pro Tools Answers, where we discuss, demonstrate and elaborate on your Pro Tools questions put to us in the official Avid Pro Tools support forum on Facebook. My name is Dave Phillips, audio engineer, certified Avid instructor and lecturer for Point Blank Music Schools. And joining me is Anders, also an Avid certified instructor at Tonecraft Work in Austria and lecturer for Siegen University in Germany.
Hi.
And also we have Andy Hageman, who is Avid's audio curriculum manager, also a master instructor for Pro Tools, and he's based over in Tokyo.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Now, what we do every time we come across posts that we can contribute to on the forum is we throw our 2 yen in. But there's generally so much noise in the group and nuance in the circumstances that the right answers aren't always highlighted, and often there isn't enough information to clearly present the answer anyway. A part of our job as lecturers and trainers is to take complex issues and then boil them down with clear explanations and demonstrations in context, and that's what we aim to do here today, and that's what we aim to do in every video we make. Hopefully we achieve it. Only you can tell us. Before I continue, could I ask you guys, if you like what you're doing, could you please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so that you get all the notifications when we release our videos every week. And if you like what we're doing with the video, please hit like, and if you don't like it, you're welcome to dislike it as well. Okay, today's question comes to us actually from a couple of guys. We have one from Ben and we have one from Andrew, and it's part of a very, very large conversation that we've discovered. So let's start off with looking at Andrew's question first, and it's kind of long, so get comfy. Hi, just wanted to see if anyone can give us some pointers on looping. I've used but for the past year, but I've been trying to make the transition to Pro Tools as I find some of its features really good. That said, it seems to be very difficult to work in. This is probably more down to my lack of knowledge and experience with the DAW, though. In the pic below, I have a screenshot of a section I'm working on in Pro Tools. I like to loop playback whilst we're working and editing a selection. The problem is that every time I stop and re-hit playback, it forgets the loop, and then I have to reset it up again, or sometimes it just changes and loops a smaller part that I'm editing. I've tried pressing N, which occasionally helps, but this doesn't seem to give any power to fix the loop on a particular section. Does anyone know any way to fix the position of the loop while you work on that part of the track? Yes. And hopefully...
Moving on. Okay, great. Thank you.
So, let's start with... we wanted to break this question down to a couple of things. So I think we're going to start off with talking about how to loop a track to start with, right? Or how to loop a clip to begin with. And then...
Loop a selection,
yeah,
maybe.
It's a loop a selection. And then essentially how to break it, which seems to be what is happening here. Now, if I show you my Pro Tools window, I have a clip selected here, and I think this is typically a way that a majority of us will be working in Pro Tools standard. We have this button turned on here, which if I hover over it long enough, it should give us the tooltip, and it's telling us that it's linking the edit selection and the timeline selection. So what basically happens is when you select a clip, Pro Tools will play back from the beginning of that selection, and that's essentially what he's trying to do here in this. That's his basic workflow, isn't it? So we'll go up to this little button here and we'll make sure that this is turned on, and this is linking our edit selection, which is here, and our timeline selection, which is here. So what will happen with this turned on is, and this is what I think Andrew wants to happen as standard, is when he selects a clip or makes a selection on the timeline, Pro Tools will play back from that point. But what is happening when he presses N, which is turning on this button here, insertion follows playback, is that Pro Tools essentially now acts like a tape machine. So when you press play and then press stop, the loop disappears, and you press play again, and the playback will continue from the point at which Pro Tools, or you tell Pro Tools to stop. So whereas what we tend to like to happen is if we make our selection or with our clip and we hit play and then we press stop, and we expect that playback to then start again from the beginning of our selection. I think that's what we like to happen majority of the time. And I think that's what Andrew's expecting to happen. But as he says, when he presses the N key and turns on insertion follows playback, it's putting Pro Tools into a completely different mode now, and it's essentially overriding the timeline and the edit selection linking. Because when he hits play, it will start from the beginning of that selection, but pressing stop will get rid of that selection, keep the playhead where he hit stop at, and then when you press start again, the playhead will begin playback from the place at which it stopped. And I think he's almost presenting N as a bit of a solution, but I think that's generally the problem, isn't it? And maybe, well, actually, I'm suggesting, someone has suggested to him that he presses N, and maybe that's his fix, which is turning it off, isn't it? And what I tend to find, because I've got massive hamburger hands, is that I use spacebar as my play button, and N is next to the spacebar, isn't it? So every so often, this is my usual thing, and I'll hit spacebar, and I'll also hit N at the same time, which turns on insertion follows playback. And there you go, my loop has completely disappeared.
Yeah, but in the screenshot, in the question, the function insertion follows playback is clearly not turned on. And
No, absolutely, you're right. But that photo might not necessarily be showing us the exact moment that he's actually having trouble.
And I suspect that there's something else going on here, and I interpret the question in that way as well. So if I can show you my screen, or Andy, do you want to take this, or should I?
Well, let's before we go down that road, which I think you might be right, and I think there are two different issues that this person's talking about. And by the way, both of those issues are issues that every single Pro Tools user has had to contend with. So first of all, don't feel stupid, because we've all been like that. And by the way, Dave is 100% right, 0% wrong. The biggest requested unshortcut is disable the N key.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we don't want a shortcut on that. But so far, it's not been done. So if you're a spacebar playback guy, which most people I think are, then hitting that N key is something that can happen, and it's important to understand what it does. So let me real quickly share my screen.
Just while you do that, Andy, it's worth mentioning that the N key only works when you've got keyboard command focus mode on, which is this little button here on the right hand side by your
exactly right
by your clip list.
So moving this out of the way, so you're 100% right. So if I've got a selected area over here, and my timeline insertion follows playback is disabled, so you can see over here right underneath the selector that it's disabled. So if I go over here and hit playback, I stop, and it does not reset my selected area. Now, I teach a lot of students, and here's the way I explain it. Maybe this is a way to think about it. I now have enabled, and I can either do this with the N key or I can just do it by clicking the button. I have enabled timeline insertion follows playback. And think about it this way, is wherever you stop playback, it will act as if you clicked with the selector tool. Okay, so if I go over here and play and then stop, well, what would happen in a selected area if you click with the selector tool? Exactly the same thing, which leads to the next question. Why would anybody want to work this way? And I would say post-production.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, so if you're working on, dialogue or something like that, you're not looping anything. You're moving from a place, and then you're moving on from another place. And so there's a lot of workflows that would not use timeline insertion follow playback, as many as which do. So it's important to understand what this does and when to enable or disable it. The final thing I'll show you before we kind of close this one out or move on to the next thing is, of all things, this works with, if you go into options and you go into your scroll modes, of all things, if you scroll after playback, what will happen? I've got timeline insertion follows playback on, and I'm going to zoom way in here. Come on, here we go. So I'm going to zoom way in, and I'm at bar 9. Okay, so if I start playback, and then I'm at 10, and I stop, well, this actually works out just fine because timeline insertion follows playback will stop my screen where I stop playback, and because timeline insertion follows playback is on, there's my timeline insertion, and so turning timeline insertion follows playback on and scroll through playback is a nice combination. Just as turning timeline insertion follows playback off is a good combination with the no scrolling mode, and they're just different kinds of workflows. If you want to keep your selection, Dave's right, is that if you want to keep your selection after you're done playing, then turn this off, which you can do anytime. You can do this while you're playing. So you can turn it on and off while you're playing. So if you get it wrong and you start it off and you realize that you might have a problem, you can always turn it on or off during playback. So I just wanted to, before we moved on, that is a problem that if this poster doesn't have that exact problem, I've talked with a bunch of people who do, especially folks that are moving from a different DAW. It works completely fine, but there are different situations when you want different kinds of behavior.
Is this a case of where some of the video, the post-production stuff is kind of encroaching in on the music production guys, and it's making the DAW work in a different way because Pro Tools has that video and music application.
And let's not forget game audio. If you're doing like a voiceover session for game audio where you're recording basically using a tape machine style workflow, where you're just working in that direction all the time. You're not trying to get to align stuff because you're only working on one track, or you're doing audiobooks recording or something like that. That's just perfect workflows for those kinds of scenarios. It's just a matter of knowing when to put it on and when to have it off.
Exactly, and it can be quite annoying if you just want to play through and you hit stop and it goes back an hour.
Yeah, exactly.
And then suddenly you got to go and find your right insertion point again. So,
yeah.
By the way, if you get stuck on this, so if timeline insertion follows playback is on, and you make a selection and you hit it and you stop and you lose it, like I just did, you have one way to get it back, and that is to go to Edit, Restore Last Selection, which is Option Command Z.
Yeah.
And that one is worth its weight in gold.
You've no idea how many times that saves me during Beat Detective editing.
Oh yeah,
yeah, it's great.
Completely.
But like I said before, I interpret his question in another way, and one giveaway of that is clearly the last sentence here. Does anyone know of any way to fix the position of the loop whilst you work on that part of the track? And I think maybe he knows about insertion follows playback, or at least now he probably knows. But I think that this might be a case of linking timeline and edit selection, and he wants to work in another way. So let me show that in Pro Tools. In Pro Tools we have basically two kinds of selections, but usually people tend to work with timeline and edit selections linked, and it's this button up here that I'm talking about that links any selection that I do in the timeline field, or in the ruler, timeline ruler, and in the playlist of a track. So basically, when you just double click on a clip or something to select it, or you make a selection, the timeline selection and edit selections stay the same. But let's talk about the differences here, not how they are usually linked. So I'll unlink timeline and edit selection. I'm using the shortcut here, by the way, which is Shift slash. Or is it a forward slash? I never learned.
It's a forward slash. Shift and forward slash.
Forward slash.
But you can manually, of course, also click on this button. When I've unlinked these, it becomes really evident when I'm making an edit selection, which is done in the edit playlist of a track. you can see how it differs from a timeline selection that I make up in the timeline ruler. And the timeline selection is these blue little arrows. They turn red if a track is in record enabled, but right now I'm not, so they are blue. And you can see the edit selection having these golden or yellow vertical lines with a dot. And there you can see that these selections are different. The timeline selection is where Pro Tools Playback will play when I hit start. And the edit selection here is where any edit maneuvers that I do actually happen in the track. And of course, if you have your timeline and edit selections linked, which is the way that most of us probably work, and you make a selection somewhere and you start listening to these drums, for instance, and then you stop playback to make an edit. And every time I do that, I lose my timeline selection. So when I repress start or play, it will play from the insertion point. And I think that this is what's happening. And I think that the original poster here, he might be after a way to unlink the timeline and edit selection, which I now did, so that he can now play his loop, as he calls it, or his selection, go in and do some editing, and next time he presses start or play, it will play the same loop again, as he calls it, with the same selection. And I think that's what's happening.
And just because we're in the sub-theme of feeling stupid, how many times have you unlinked, edit timeline selection, done your work, and then gone on and then realized about 5 minutes later that you haven't relinked it back?
It's happened a lot.
So when that happens to you, don't feel dumb.
Yeah.
And this is also one thing that even if you shut down Pro Tools now, open it tomorrow,
right,
this setting will remain. And I have to tell you a funny story. I was teaching Pro Tools at the university. I won't mention the name, but the computer tech there, he told me that they've had computers where this happened and they didn't know about this function, and they got so frustrated that they ended up reinstalling Pro Tools to fix this problem.
Well, thank God they didn't get to trashing the prefs.
I mean, if you don't know about this, this can be really, really frustrating when you're stuck in the wrong mode here. So,
yeah. It's so funny. And the timeline insertion follows linking timeline and edit selection is basically a basic mode of Pro Tools. I think as I was saying at the beginning, I think it's the way that we work in Pro Tools a majority of the time. If for no other reason than just giving yourself, when you want to start a track from a particular place, you click on the timeline and hit play. And because clicking on the timeline inserts an edit selection, although it's an edit selection of just one sample, isn't it, essentially? You hit play, and that's where the playhead starts from, because it's following you're making a timeline selection by making an edit selection. And it's such a basic way that we all work that I want to start from bar 29, so I'll click on bar 29, but I'm not going to click on bar 29 on the timeline itself. I'm going to click on the time base, sorry. I'm going to be clicking it on the actual editing area. And I think it's probably so simple that it's not worth, we don't think to mention it, but it's probably a same way that you guys work all the time as well.
But I can show how I use this to my advantage. If I'm sharing my screen again here, I have made a timeline and edit selection because they're now linked. You can see even in the MIDI editor I have this button here, and they're both linked. It's a 2-bar drum thing that I'm editing here, and this is a typical way that I would use this function to my advantage, which is now linked. So I'll just go ahead and play this section. Whoa, I lost my selection. 85 to 87. Sorry, you have to edit this out.
Anders is 404'd.
Okay, so What happened there was it didn't respond to my shortcuts because I was still in the other window. But this is my 2-bar drum loop here. And this is a typical thing. I need to get in here and really tweak some individual notes, make them slightly louder or softer or something like that. And every time I do so, and I select a note here to make it louder, I just lost my loop. And I have to reset my selection again to be able to hear the entirety of this section. So if I turn off timeline and the linking of timeline and edit selection, I can now play back the loop or the selection, which is now a timeline selection, and I can go in and make adjustments. So maybe take this little snare here, make it a little bit louder, play back the entire loop again when I start playback again. Okay, that was good. Maybe make this a little bit louder as well. Okay, and play back the entire loop without having to reset that. And that's the way I use link timeline or unlink timeline and edit selection, of course.
No, I do exactly the same thing. If you weren't going to show that, I was going to, because when you're in the MIDI world, when you're writing music, having a musical phrase, which we work on all the time in music, having a musical phrase is the way we work. But we also are going to want to edit and transpose and move around notes and stuff like that. So that's exactly 100% the way that I typically will use unlinking, except for the fact that you have to remember to relink it. Now let me show another real quick way that you can use unlinking and another feature. And Dave, I think this might have been another question about my main ruler is twice as high.
Yes.
Twice as tall.
We've seen that question pop up before.
Let's read that question as well.
Can you read that? Is that a question we got?
It's Ben asked, is someone able to assist me with why when I click on a clip, it won't automatically play from that selection? And there's also a little video clip here showing his frustration. But one thing is obvious to us here is that Andy, do you want to explain?
No, I'm just previewing, showing my thing.
Do it.
Oh, okay. There we go. Wow, what a professional team. So what we've got here is our normal rulers and timeline insertion flows. Playback is on. So that means that if I was to start playback, it would clear my selection, right? Now in addition to unlinking, there's another way that we can work, okay? And this is a cute little guy. And if you go up into options and you turn off dynamic transport, or turn on dynamic transport rather, the shortcut is Command Control P, YP, for dynamic transport. I don't know. We ran out of shortcuts. And what's going to happen, if you take a look, you're going to see now that your timeline is twice as tall. That's the most obvious change. The second one is that you've got this little blue triangle. That's the second most obvious change. But the third change, which is not obvious, is that guess what? It automatically turned off your edit and timeline selection. So it doesn't matter if your timeline insertion follows playback is on or off. You won't lose that selection because you're not linked. And so this is a really cool way of working. And here's how I do this. Do this in music all the time. I want to make sure that this is a loopable selection, but it's long. It's something like 9 bars, okay? And I don't want to have to listen to the whole thing before it loops back, right? So I'm going to move this little blue triangle, which represents the place where playback will start when I hit the space bar. And so now I'll move it close to the end, pop it, and then it's going to move back to the beginning. So it's an interesting way to work with your edit and timeline selection unlinked. Could I play before my selection? Sure. I just moved that little the little triangle. Great. Could I play after my selection? Yeah, I don't know exactly why you would do it, but you can. So you can move this anywhere you want to, and again, if you move it back into the middle, you can. So it's a great way to work. It's almost like this. The theme of the show is turn off the tools when you don't need them. This is another tool where if you don't need it, it can only cause you heartache. And so that's why Command Control P for transport will turn it back off. Then your ruler goes to normal height, and it automatically relinks your edit and timeline selection, so you're back into the more standard way of working.
Yeah, can I add something on this?
Sure.
Great. I love dynamic transport, and I use it quite a lot. And as Andy here mentioned, it remembers the state of your link timeline and edit selection, meaning if it's on, and when you return, if it was on before dynamic transport, it will be on again when you leave it, or if it was off, it will be off when you leave dynamic transport. I love that feature. So I can just show a little workflow around this, which is also a little added sugar cube. What I have up here is some English forest recording. Dave, you feel at home when you're in the forest?
I'm so zen right now.
Okay, that's great. That's great. And this is a fairly long recording, and from time to time you need a very, very long recording, or a recording for ambience maybe that you want to repeat over and over and over and over again. You get the idea. And you need to create a great loop for that. So when you're doing this, it's always good to cut off the start of the selection, not to use that, because usually it has a fade in. And then I'll just go in at some place, even where it looks a bit busy here, and I'll just separate this clip in this particular location here. And then I'll move this starting part here to somewhere where it looks to almost fit in the timeline. And I'll do a little selection here and just crossfade this part in the middle. And why did I just do that? Because this part used to sit right on this part right here, right? So I know that this will loop perfectly. So the only part that I have to worry about is this guy here. But what I really should do now is just try this part in the middle, the crossfade, and I want also to try the loop, how the loop works. So I just made an edit selection of these clips, and I'll engage dynamic playback again. And this gives me the little play start marker, so I can play from exactly this location. That's a pretty long loop. So I'm just listening through this crossfade here to hear if it works. Yeah, sounds great. And without letting go of my selection now, I can now play the exact end to hear how the loop actually works. So I'll just play this part here and pay attention to how smoothly this will go. That's fantastic.
Oh, unbelievable.
Yeah, so that's, and then of course, don't forget to disable dynamic transport with Command Control P.
That's incredibly clever. Now, we've been talking about a lot of shortcuts today, and I think it'd be a pretty good idea to mention that if you've got one of the larger keyboards, with the numerical keypad at the back, you can get Pro Tools shortcut little stickers and the overlays to actually put on the keyboards that can remind you what all of these shortcuts are. Because, if you work with a shortcut often, you internalize it, don't you? And it becomes very automatic. But there are so many shortcuts in there that we just forget, and features that we'll all forget about. And these little kind of overlays can give you a nice little reminder of some of the most important ones, or some of the more like the more regularly used important ones.
Yes, but they don't make them for ergonomic keyboards. So if you've got a strange keyboard, it doesn't work. So I have to remember them.
Yeah, mine is an extremely old, like, DigiDesign
Wow.
But
you have to crank it up.
It's great. I love that keyboard.
I don't think there's much more. Well, there probably is a lot more that we could talk about on this subject, but I think we should we should put a hard cut right here. So thank you very much to Anders for all your cleverness.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Andy's enormous brain.
Thank you. And hit the subscribe button on our website.
Yeah. You should. And not only there, also here on YouTube.
Yeah, there's a lot of places that you can subscribe to us now. We've got the YouTube channel you can subscribe to. We've got the Facebook page that you can like. And we've also got our brand new website that Andy has just given a beautiful new overhaul. And you can subscribe to a newsletter list on there. And hopefully there'll be lots of stuff that we'll be able to send you in a non-spammy way that will...
We promise.
Yeah. So all Lee's been to say is thank you for joining us, guys. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you as always. Hopefully we'll see you in our next video. For all of us at Pro Tools Answers, my name's Dave. We've had a great time. See you next time, and we're out.